Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Geeks and Gamers. I am the critic who is a cynic. Welcome back once again for another box office breakdown. This time we're going to be focusing on the new Mission Impossible film and also Mission Impossible throughout the years. So to me, this is an excellent example of a franchise that knows what its fan base wants and constantly not only delivers what they want, but also tries to up the ante with every single film. And when you actually look at the box office numbers, what you end up seeing is that there's a trend that when you actually, like they have done in Mission Impossible, do things that fans like, do things that people actually want to go see, people are going to show up to watch your movies. And I think this is something that a lot of people, especially people over at Lucasfilm, could actually take a page out of the playbook for, especially in reference to the newest Mission Impossible Fallout. So if you have not seen this movie yet, guys, go check it out. It is really awesome. Like, I am not just, blowing hot air by saying that this is probably one of the greatest action films of the last decade, probably maybe even of all time. That's how good it is. And one of the main reasons why, one of the main things that Mission Impossible gets right is the fact that it focuses on practical effects and good basic storytelling. It doesn't have to get convoluted. It doesn't have to try and tie in 1,000 different story arcs, though this one I will say has more twists and turns than the other ones have. It's pretty kind of common in the Mission Impossible film to have some twists and turns here and there, but it does so in a very simplistic way that's effective. It makes the people watching it say, you know what? I like what I'm seeing. It might even be somewhat predictable, but you know what? I can still enjoy what I am watching. And that to me is the formula that I feel like a lot of film franchises, especially ones that span over several years, like this one has. A lot of people fail to remember this film franchise started back in 1996. Obviously, it was based off of previous material with the TV series, but as the movies, starring Tom Cruise, these films started back in 1996 and they are still going strong. They are still going over 20 years later. They are still making these films, and they're just getting better and better. And man, Tom Cruise, like, say what you want about him in his personal life, but no one can deny the fact that this guy is an action star. But the very fact alone that he does 90+% of his own stunts tells you all that you really need to know about this guy. So anyway, Mission Impossible Fallout, it's a really great film. As you can see, Rotten Tomatoes score right now is 97% of critics like it, 90% of audiences like it as well, and I think that's a pretty good number. Again, that is usually the combination for a good box office draw. If you have a high critic consensus and also a high audience rating, that usually coincides with having a big box office. Why is that the case? Well, it means that, one, it's a well-made film, because usually when you look at Rotten Tomatoes, you really have to understand how to break it down. When you look at the critic score, usually what that tells you, obviously there's exceptions, but usually what it tells you is it a well-crafted, well-made film? If it's a high score, then most likely it is. And then the audience rating tells you something else. Is it fun? Is it worth going to see in theaters? Is it enjoyable? And that's why you can't just take one score or the other. You have to take both together. That's one of the reasons why, going back to those exceptions, we were able to go back to The Last Jedi and see, wait a minute, there's a very high critic consensus, but the audience rating is significantly low. What is the difference there? Oh, that's right. It was not a good time experience, but because it had certain things that the critic world seemed to like, they went ahead and defended it and went ahead and given it a high score, but obviously audiences were not nearly as acceptable of the movie as we see in the current divide today. But when it comes to Mission Impossible films, we've seen this back and forth go through, but also we've seen it affect the box office numbers, and that's the reason why, if Star Wars especially, since again, Geeks and Gamers covers a lot of different things, but a lot of it has been Star Wars news lately, if Star Wars wants to be able to bring people back into the seats, because I remember, I just checked the numbers for Solo once again, and it is still at $391 million worldwide, and it's not making a whole lot of money, and so there's no way at this point that it's going to reach $400 million by the time they decide to pull it out of all 170 screens that it's still in. So that film is done. But if Star Wars wants to be able to bring people back and actually break $1 billion, and if not that, actually make a huge profit on top of maybe getting close to Force Awakens numbers, they got to go back to basics. They got to go back to, this is what fans want, let's deliver it, and let's do it well. That is, it really is so simple. You don't have to make a complex story. You don't have to just go crazy with the narrative. All you have to do is tell a very simple story, but have the characters, have good character development, have solid character development, and that's all you need. That's what Mission Impossible Fallout had. It not only brought back characters that have been in the franchise for a long time, it was able to bring back certain characters. It was able to bring back certain character moments. There was one scene in particular, if you haven't seen it, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but there was one scene in particular that it comes directly from the first movie, and it wasn't until I saw the first movie again with my wife a couple weeks ago that I realized, wait a minute, I had totally forgotten that this was one of the original things, one of the first things that we saw in the first and original Mission Impossible movie. So that's how you do it. You bring certain things back, you keep things focused, and you make a good film. It really is kind of simple. Like, people always say, oh, it's hard to make a good movie. It's like, when you actually listen to the fans, when the fans tell you, we don't like that, this is not the way to go, this is not entertaining, then you simply say, okay, you spoke with your wallet, we're going to go ahead and listen to what you have to say. Hopefully after the solo box office disaster, they start to listen, but Mission Impossible seems to have gotten that for the most part. And let me actually break down the numbers for you, just so that way you can have a better idea of not only what the Rotten Tomatoes scores were for these films, but also the overall gross of the films as well. So when we go to the first Mission Impossible film, it did a very good job. I mean, this is back in 1996, so these are all adjusted for inflation, so this is in modern day dollars. So back in the day, Mission Impossible made a whopping $735 million, and that was with a Rotten Tomatoes score 63% from critics and 71% of audience rating. So as you see, both are relatively high audience. Obviously, the critics rating is a bit low, but audiences seem to enjoy for the most part, and that's why people went out to go see it. It was well marketed. People thought, oh, this looks like kind of a new American James Bond in a lot of ways, so I'm going to go out and support the film. And it was actually a very good film, so people said, okay, I'm going to come back for the next film that came out in around 2000, Mission Impossible 2. Now, this is notoriously one of the worst films made, and definitely the worst Mission Impossible film ever made. As you can see, 57% from critics and 43%, that's even worse than The Last Jedi, for the audience rating. And as you see, though, some people might say, but then why did it almost make $800 million? But remember that when a film, Mission Impossible, does very well and gets people excited, that means more people are going to come back for the next film and say, ooh, I really cannot wait to see this film. That's why a lot of people say, look at the $1.3 billion of The Last Jedi, and keep in mind that now people are so pissed off because they saw it and they know that, ooh, I don't really like this direction. Wait for that number to come back for the next film, because that likely is going to be a lot lower, just because normally that happens. As you can see here, we see the differences. Again, $735 million to $799 million because people were excited for it. They said, oh, the one in 96 was awesome. I cannot wait to see this one. This one was a very poorly written movie with poor characters. Even though the action sequences were pretty cool, it didn't really deliver. It did not try and deliver a good, strong, basic storyline, and had really bad characters in it. So therefore, it did not, overall, it didn't do well with critics and audiences. And we see the effect of this film for Mission Impossible 3. Now, as you see, when you look at the scores, 70% versus 69%. So almost equal footing with the first Mission Impossible film. But look at the box office draw. $497 million. So that's a difference of almost $200+ million. Well, why do you think there is that kind of a loss? Because Mission Impossible 2 was so bad, it was so weak that it made people say, wait a minute, there's a new Mission Impossible. I remember the last one. It wasn't very good. This series is done. I'm going to go ahead and skip it. That's usually the mindset of people when they have a franchise film like that. And as we see, it had an effect, $497 million. But Mission Impossible 3 was a pretty good film. Again, 69% for the critic and audience rating. That means that it was an enjoyable film and it was worth seeing. So then people started to realize, wait a minute, this actually still is doing well. They seem to be back on track with this. And then, of course, the promotion started. So it really wasn't until Mission Impossible 4 that I really started to notice that they started to really hammer down on practical effects. Tom Cruise does all of his own stunts. They were showing so many behind-the-scenes stuff. You would go in the theater, and they would show you like the little snippets, the little sneak previews, and they would show you the things that he would be doing, and that got people really, really hyped for it. So not only did you have the strong showing of Mission Impossible 3, but you also had all these other things going on, which is why Mission Impossible 4 brought the number back up to $778 million. So pretty much recouped the loss. Didn't quite make that high point at Mission Impossible 2, but still was able to make up that $200+ million loss, and they're able to show you that the franchise still had a lot of steam in it. Now we go on to Mission Impossible 4, where we see that increased number, but also look at the Rotten Tomatoes score. 93% from critics and 76% for the audiences. So as you can see, the critics had a 93% score, so people liked it. I personally think Mission Impossible 4 is the best film in the franchise, but that's just me. Everyone has a different opinion on that, and that's the reason why, though, what we can see there is that not everyone agrees. That's why the audience rating was 76%. Now, why is that significant? Well, look at the next film, Mission Impossible 5. We see that it drops from 778 to 725. Now, people might say, like, oh, that's not much of a difference. Well, again, that showcases that 76%. A lot of people, most people still like the film, but it did not make every person happy. So guess what happened? We saw the number dip a little bit, and that's what ended up happening. So Mission Impossible 5 made $725 million, and we see that difference between critics and audience ratings, which leads us to the most modern film, which is Mission Impossible Fallout, which is currently, as we speak, at $437 million worldwide, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of a 97% of critics and a 90% of audiences, meaning this is the most well-liked Mission Impossible film of all, and I would agree with that sentiment. It is one of the best. without any doubt. Obviously, I say Mission Impossible 4 is my favorite, but Mission Impossible Fallout is definitely a close second. And I feel like those two films are going to go back and forth for a very long time, especially if this is the last film in the franchise. We don't know yet. I mean, Tom Cruise is pushing 60 years old, so who knows what he's going to do at this point. But it's really important to see this because keep this in mind that this score, and people might say, oh, it's not going to get anywhere close to Mission Impossible 5. Well, that may be, and again, we'll be able to break those numbers down when we get to it. We'll be able to break down what factors may have led to that, but here are some key things. The biggest thing to look at is the very fact that this is without a release in China. And the last film that released in China, Mission Impossible 5, made $144 million. So that is also with an increased trend in China. If you look at the numbers in China, I showed those videos in the last video I did on the solo box office numbers. What you saw is that there has been an increase in the amount of money coming out of China for Mission Impossible, which kind of just throws in the face people saying, oh, well, they weren't ready for the movie and etc. It's like, no. The Chinese audiences have no problems with American products and American concept films. It just has to be done well. And so that's why you see Mission Impossible is doing very well. But $144 million for Mission Impossible 5, that means if the trend continues, because again, it jumped about $30 million between Mission Impossible 4 and 5 just in China alone, if we see that same kind of jump, we could see an increase to around $200+ million, which means that alone would put the current film Fallout at over $637 million, and that's before even the end of its run. So what does that mean? It means that it's on pace at this point to probably break around the $700 million range, probably make a little bit more than that. Again, if you just look at the trends, you look at the percentages, that's pretty much the track that it's on. And if I'm wrong on that, you can call me out on it. But anyway, that's just my thoughts on this. And this is, to me, really important because, as you can see, this is a franchise that has done well almost every single time. The big exception being Mission Impossible 3, but that makes sense because Mission Impossible 2 was total garbage. So it makes sense that audiences were not trustworthy of. But this also says a lot more about other episodic films, specifically Star Wars, because this is the film that we'll be talking about a lot lately, that if they don't right the ship, they're already going to take a loss with this film, which is another reason why they very well might break this film in two, because what they can do then is part one can take that fall. It's going to happen inevitably because that film had such a low score from audiences, it's going to have that drop. Doesn't matter what the audience, rather, it doesn't matter what the critic rating is because, as you saw, the critic rating just comes from the critics. They're the ones who usually get to see the movie for free. They're not actually going out buying their tickets. Audiences, though, they speak with their wallet. And what you see consistently is that when the audience rating is low, sometimes it can affect a movie as it's out if the word of mouth is really bad, but it could also have a negative impact on any future films of that same franchise, as we saw here with Mission Impossible, because Mission Impossible 3, by all regards, was a well thought out, well-made movie, but still made significantly less than everyone else, including the worst one. Why? Because of the trends. So if the trends continue, $1.3 billion for Star Wars The Last Jedi is likely going to equal. And that's why I keep saying at this point, there is just no way in my mind that the next episode is going to break $1 billion. But if that is the case, if J.J. Abrams can break away from Kathleen Kennedy, which who knows what's going to happen with that, but if he can break away, if he can make an original story, if he can be able to retcon some of the nonsense things that Rian Johnson brought into Episode 8, we could see the fall happen with Episode 9, but then he comes back with Episode 10 and makes the movie that he was trying to make from the very beginning, and then that movie could be the next film that makes $1.5 to $2 billion again. But anyway, that's just my thoughts on this, guys. What are y'all's thoughts on this? What are y'all's thoughts on Mission Impossible? Let me know what your favorite Mission Impossible film is in the comments. And also, do you think that if they break the last Star Wars film into two films, that we could see that, you know, that drop in the first one in part one, but then part two picks it up? Let me know. I'd love to hear that. That's just my own thought on this. When I was looking at these numbers, I thought to myself, hey, you know what? That just makes a lot of sense that the next film is bound to lose money. So why not split it into two and keep that first one a retcon of Episode 8, so that way you can come back strong with 10, because guess what? You're going to make a lot of people happy if you do that retcon in Episode 9, and they are more likely to go see and pay multiple times to go see 10, especially if it sets up some really cool things. So anyway, guys, thank y'all so much for joining us today. If you have not done so already, please hit that subscribe, hit that like button for Geeks and Gamers. I would greatly appreciate that. It helps all of us out a lot. Have a great day, and as always, God bless.